Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why sometimes you just can't seem to get a grip on your own learning or performance? This new study dives into how our brain's control centers affects how well we keep tabs on ourselves. Think about it. When you are trying to learn something new or even just solve a problem, you are constantly checking in with yourself. Are you understanding this? Are you making mistakes? This self-checking is called metacognitive monitoring, and it is super important for figuring out if you need to change your approach, right? But what makes some kids better at this than others? This study looked at two key brain skills called executive functions and how they might help or hinder this self-monitoring ability. They specifically zeroed in on two executive functions: inhibition, which is like your brain's ability to stop and resist distractions or impulses, and updating of working memory, which is your brain's capacity to hold on to and manipulate information on the fly. So the big question here was, are these executive functions like the engine that powers our self-monitoring, or are they just along for the ride, happening at the same time but not really connected? They wanted to see if messing with the challenge of these executive functions would actually change how well kids could monitor themselves. To figure this out, they designed a really clever study. They got a group of kids, some 7-year-olds and some 9-year-olds. The 7-year-olds even came back about 17 months later, so the researchers could see how these skills changed over time. They had the kids play a couple of computer games. One was called the Metacognitive Odd One Out task, which tested their working memory. Imagine seeing a bunch of shapes and having to remember which one was different, and then remembering the order they appeared. After they did that, they had to say how confident they were that they got it right. The other game was the Metacognitive Animal Stroop task, which tested their inhibition. In this one, they saw pictures of animals and they had to click on the one that would be bigger in real life. The tricky part was, sometimes the animal that looked bigger on screen was actually smaller in real life. So they had to ignore what they saw and focus on what they knew. Again, after each response, they had to estimate how fast they thought they responded. The key here was that they played with the difficulty of these games. For the working memory game, they changed how many shapes the kids had to remember. For the inhibition game, they made some trials harder by presenting misleading visual cues. By changing the difficulty, they were essentially increasing the demand on those specific executive functions. Now, let's get to what they actually found, which is where things get really interesting. First, looking at the kids at one point in time, they found that for the inhibition task, the harder it was to inhibit distractions, the less accurate the kids were at monitoring their own performance. This means when their stop thinking about distraction skill was really being tested, their ability to check how well they were doing also took a hit. It is like their brain had to use so much energy just to avoid getting sidetracked that there wasn't enough left over to accurately judge how they were performing. And this effect actually got stronger as the kids got older. This suggests that as kids get older, their ability to handle these challenging inhibition tasks becomes more and more tied to how well they can monitor themselves. When it came to the working memory task, the results were a bit more nuanced. On their very first try at the game, when the working memory demands were high, it didn't seem to affect how accurately the kids monitored their performance. This was a bit surprising because in adults, this kind of thing usually does affect monitoring accuracy. But here is where the longitudinal part, where the younger kids came back later, became crucial. When the kids played the working memory game for a second time, something changed. Now, when the working memory demands were higher, their monitoring accuracy actually suffered. This suggests that with practice, kids start using their monitoring skills more like adults do. It implies that maybe at first, kids rely on general knowledge or beliefs about the task to judge their performance. But with more experience, they start relying more on the actual feeling and difficulty they experience during the task. And when that experience is being heavily impacted by working memory load, their monitoring accuracy goes down. So, what does all this mean? Well, the study strongly suggests that our executive functions and our ability to monitor ourselves are definitely linked. They don't just happen to be related, they seem to depend on each other. One of the main theories that explains this is the idea of a competition for resources. Imagine your brain has a limited amount of mental energy or focus. When you are using a lot of that energy to, say, keep distractions out, inhibition, or hold a lot of information in your mind, working memory, there is simply less energy left over for accurately checking how you are doing. It is like trying to juggle too many balls eventually. One or more will drop. This is a really important finding because it helps us understand why some kids might struggle more with self-monitoring. If they have weaker executive functions, they might be using up more of their mental energy just to perform the basic task, leaving less for the crucial self-reflection part. Now, no study is perfect. The researchers pointed out that they looked at a pretty narrow age range, so they can't say for sure how this applies to much younger or much older kids. Also, they use specific types of games, and how we monitor ourselves might be different depending on the task. For example, judging your memory recall might be different from judging how fast you made a decision. But what are the practical takeaways from this research? Well, for teachers and parents, it suggests that if you want to help kids improve their self-monitoring, it might be beneficial to reduce the cognitive load of the main task. If the task itself is too demanding on executive functions, it is going to be harder for kids to effectively monitor their own performance. This could mean breaking down complex instructions, minimizing distractions in the learning environment, or providing more scaffolding. And for us as learners, it's a reminder that our cognitive resources are indeed limited. When you are feeling drained or facing a really challenging task, paying attention to your own thinking might be harder. This could mean being more strategic about when to tackle difficult learning, or using techniques like cognitive offloading, like making notes, or using reminders to free up your mental energy for monitoring. This study is a great step forward in understanding the complex relationship between executive functions and metacognition. It really highlights that these aren't just separate skills, but interconnected parts of our cognitive system that support each other. Future research could explore how to best train these skills together, and perhaps look at how other executive functions or different types of monitoring judgments play a role. It is a fascinating look into how our brain manages itself, and more importantly, how we can help ourselves and our children become more effective learners by understanding these underlying processes. Thanks for joining me on RUBIN'S Mind Lab. If you found this interesting, give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more awesome science insights. See you next time.